Hi, everyone, and welcome to NOTeD, News of the Day, brought to you by the True Health Initiative. I am Dr. Tom Rifai, a board-certified internal medicine and lifestyle medicine specialist, and we are really happy and honored to bring today Professor Sebastien Chastin from both the Glasgow Caledonian University as well as Ghent University, and to bring his information, not only the most recent, but maybe we'll dig into some history, but in terms of his building all of our ability to understand physical activity and the importance of it. And I say physical activity specifically, Professor Chastin, because the data that you're bringing out doesn't just categorize everything as formal structured exercise in a gym for 30 minutes, 5 days per week. So we will get into that. Welcome to NOTeD. Thank you so much for being here.
Tom, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It is absolutely our pleasure. If you don't mind, though, before we get into that, we are about what makes people tick. We all tend to have a passion and some thing that makes us interested in what we're doing, whether it's a specific area of lifestyle in terms of physical activity, or the overall doesn't really matter so much as the story. And thank you for providing me the permission to call you Seb. You can please call me Tom. Seb, why are you so you are clearly passionate about this. You're very, very not just knowledgeable, but you can tell it's not just technical. When you put out a post, you have an energy that translates even from online. Where are the origins of your passion and interest in this area of science? Where did it start?
It comes from various places, Tom. The first one, I'm obviously very passionate about health and helping populations be healthy and as resilient as possible. That's one of the things we have as a gift of life, is to be on this planet and trying to be on it for as long as possible in as good health as possible is a passion. Then I love exercise. I love physical activity. I love being outdoors. I live in Scotland for a good reason, is that our outdoor environment is second to none, really. So as often as possible, I try to go outside and enjoy the world as it is in all its beauty. And I always loved sport. And I'm also a strange combination, because I'm part physiotherapist, and I train as a physiotherapist because I like movement, and I really enjoyed that job. But I had a real immense frustration in doing clinical work, of seeing the same people coming back through time and time again, and also being constantly confronted by things that were to do more with people's daily life rather than just purely musculoskeletal problems that I could fix with some simple therapeutic exercise. And often what I ended up doing is asking my patients to just go out and enjoy the world and move, run around, be part of something. That's on one hand. On the other hand, I'm a physicist. I have a doctorate in physics, and I particularly like complex systems and things that are not easily understood, behavior that are not easily understood. So if you think about it, the movement behavior of humans, it's particularly tricky, because we are not only a physiological being with some laws, but we also have an element of free will. And then you take that and you put it into a system that has his own life, the environment we live in, the society we live in. And so that makes for really complex interactions. And then there are ways we can measure and have really precise data about what the movements are when they happen. So that gives us some intelligence about trying to understand our own behavior and how that can be shaped and turned in something that is beneficial. So that's a combination of things, really.
And were there times early in life that you remember someone set a value, whether it's a teacher or a parent or an uncle, or the value of physical activity, or really is it in Scotland? Is it in Glasgow? Just that's the culture we come from, or was there a specific person that really inspired you?
Not particularly. I grew up in a family that always cycled. Cycling was a big part of our life. So I was on a bicycle before I started to walk, really. So that was part and the enjoyment of the outdoors. So that nobody particularly said to me, be active, but that was a normal thing to do. And at the same time, I was a bit of a bookworm, so it was a bit of a confrontation in my early life. But I actually grew up in France rather than Scotland. Yeah, I mean, we just enjoy the weather on the Mediterranean, so we were outdoor a lot most of the time.
All right, wonderful. Parlez-vous français?
Oui.
Okay, yours is much better than mine, I'm sure. That is wonderful. Thank you so much. And with that clear passion and background, we have some evidence that you have been bringing us. And as a matter of fact, maybe we can start with the first of the two, if you don't mind. And that, in light of how much work we've been trying to provide in terms of providing dispassionate information regarding COVID to the public and the power of lifestyle in terms of what we can control, you've really put together an analysis of the power of physical activity in terms of infection control, not just in terms of the reducing of the severity, potentially even just the contraction at all. And then thirdly, the efficacy of vaccines based on level of previously established physical activity. Could you, for our smart but lay audience, summarize the findings of that particular publication that recently came out?
Yeah, so that publication has an interesting story to it, because I was part of the group of experts that put together the World Health Organization's latest recommendations on physical activity and sedentary behavior. And we were doing this in Geneva. We were just finalizing this in Geneva when COVID kicked off. And we were at the headquarters of the WHO when they started declaring the pandemic. So that was an interesting moment. But we've long known that physical activity is an absolute panacea when it comes to non-communicable diseases. So diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, we have to remember account for the majority of premature death on Earth. So we don't die so much of something coming and attacking us as to what we do to ourselves, or what our environment does to us through behavior. So we went there and we put the recommendations, and then we suddenly thought, we've put this recommendation with respect to non-communicable diseases, but we've not really even thought about infectious disease in that document. So immediately when I came back to Scotland, I put a team together because we wanted to just try to get a hand on what is the evidence based on that. I was aware of a lot of research on elite athletes and their reaction of their immune system to exercise very, very immediately after exercise. There was quite a lot of research I was aware of that, but nothing that could be directly translatable to population health. So we put a team together with the simple idea: let's synthesize the literature, the evidence base, try to quantify the effect and inform our governments immediately, because we had an inkling that physical activity would play an important role in controlling the pandemic. And at the time, people were in lockdown, and we wanted the governments to encourage people to remain active for mental health purposes, to preserve their health against non-communicable diseases. But we thought we could also kill two birds with one stone and have an impact on infectious disease as well. So we immediately put a team together. We implemented what we call a systematic review, which has a systematic search of all the scientific literature that has very specific criteria about what literature we look at and the one we discard. And then we have a methodology for, if you want, stacking up all the results together. And we were interested in three things. First of all, is physical activity protective against infectious disease, so falling ill of an infection such as COVID? The second one was, does physical activity have an impact on our immune system? Does it change our immune system? And finally, does physical activity actually change our response to vaccines? Excuse me. So the first one it was a striking result. So we were able to stack about 6 cohort studies. So the cohort studies, they're big epidemiological studies where people are measured and then followed up over time. And in about 500,000 individuals over 6 studies, we noticed that the risk of falling ill to an infectious disease, such as a virus like COVID, was reduced by about 31%. And beyond that, the chances of premature mortality due to the infection was then decreased again by 37%. So these are substantial numbers, but they're not completely unexpected. As I said, we knew that physical activity is really good for non-communicable diseases, and the risk reduction are of this magnitude, which is important. I don't know many medications that has that effect.
No.
So we were really pleased to see this, and that comforted us in that, and it was logical. The second thing we noticed is that in a randomized control trial where people are made to exercise on one end compared to people who are not exercising, and we take blood samples, we notice that the immune system changes as a result of exercise. So what happens is the first layer of the immune system, the first defensive layer, which is really our mucosal layer inside our lungs and our eyes, and any kind of holes where things can get in, the antibodies there are reinforced. There is more of them. Then there is no real change in the kind of white blood cell counts through the body, but there is a real change in the type of immune cells that our body has when we exercise. And particularly the cells called CD4+, which are cells that are there as a surveillance cell. So they're the one that circulate around and goes and alert our immune system that something might be wrong. They are increased. So there is more surveillance in our body. And these cells are also responsible for kind of orchestrating the immune response. So if there is more of them, they survey better, but they also orchestrate how well our body responds to an assault, if you want. So that was number 2. And the final one, which is, for me, was the most crucial at the time, because we knew there was a vaccine coming, is if you exercise, I think it's a minimum of 12 weeks before you get vaccinated. That was the minimal in a randomized control trial. Your body would respond better to the vaccination more strongly than if it didn't. So that could make every dose of the vaccine count. And it's relevant to this pandemic, but it's relevant to immunization across the board. Mm-hmm. And every year we have to immunize our population against flu and many other potential diseases. So we could make this a lot more effective if we elevated the level of physical activity in the population. And it's worth saying that the data we had were not specifically on COVID, but it's logical to make the parallel. And most of the data were simply on walking. So we're not talking about a major amount of physical activity here. We're talking something commensurate to the World Health Organization recommended 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is essentially walking slightly out of breath.
And I think that might even be able to transition us to the newest data, but let's kind of summarize on how regular physical activity can improve your primary barrier. It might not, in other words, it might not hit the virus, the invader might not get in at all. If it does get in, the cells that are able to help start and really attack are also improved in their functionality, if not quantity. And then the vaccination efficacy is also improved. And that this wouldn't be surprising in the sense that we are a unit and we're a single body, and there probably isn't one lifestyle to prevent diabetes that's totally different from heart disease, that's totally different from how you improve your immune system. It really is kind of a unifying, holistic, and fits well into that thought process. What would you say, I don't know if you analyze this, but the opportunity, in other words, I don't know if I remember reading this as part of it, but what percentage of subjects met those goals versus where there's an opportunity, and what percentage are not? And as you said, though, wouldn't be that hard. We're not talking about getting into marathon running or anything like that, but nevertheless, what percentage met those goals, and what percentage do we still have an opportunity to help nudge up? And
so that specific piece of research didn't look into that. So we had either data that told us these people met the guidelines or they didn't, or we had people that were put through a specific regimen. Mm-hmm. So and they were not intervention trials in terms of are we succeeding to change people's behavior that would tell you that kind of information. Well, we know roughly that 1/3 of the world population does not meet the recommended guideline of the World Health Organization. We also know that that's not equally distributed, that women, people from ethnic minorities are at more risk of not meeting the guidelines. There's no health equality in that respect either. So there is a lot of work to be done there.
And certainly on our end of the pond, there's a lot of work. I think our numbers are pretty unfortunately low in terms of, I think, meeting the guidelines. I think we're probably on the order of maybe only 25% or so. I'll have to look that back up of Americans. That being said, into the next study, what you really, I think, helped increase our understanding about is regarding that physical activity isn't just a set moment of the day, get your exercise done. Not that that's bad. I love it. I exercise regularly, but we regularly emphasize through the True Health Initiative that in addition, natural movement, that you used technology called accelerometers, which maybe you can explain for our audience in lay terms, how that helped quantify physical activity beyond just what you're doing. Well, it may not be in the gym, but let's just say in the gym per se. That's great, and you'll give us some information regarding that, but hopefully then some practical recommendations. If I'm not mistaken, did I read the paper correctly that, and not surprising, this concept of diminishing returns, that a lot of bulk of more brisk physical activity, moderate to brisk levels of physical activity were garnered at around 20 minutes per day. And then really the idea then after that is, what can we do about not necessarily sitting for 11 hours straight? But from there, please give us a nice overall summary of what were you looking for? What did you find? And what can we then do in our daily life besides me standing up and down now and going off the screen, which I should probably set up my screen so that I can alternate, so we can find some actionable items.
Okay, so I have to put it in a perspective of the long history of physical activity research. This piece of research would have not been possible without everything we've learned beforehand. And we've always known, again, that physical activity is good for health. And there's nothing wrong with exercising and going to the gym or any of this. Actually, the risk associated with going to the gym or exercising is very, very low. And it's funny because the media tend to really catch on that a lot more, but actually it's good for you. And let's go back to what the World Health Organization guidelines are. Every move counts. And that essentially encapsulate this law of diminishing return. So if you do nothing, you're at higher risk. As soon as you start doing a little bit, you rack up your benefits very, very quickly. And we kind of estimate that around between 20 and 30 minutes a day, that's where you get, if you want, your best bang for your buck in terms of time investment. That's what we considered when we only looked at physical activity on its own. But during the day, as part of all the movement we make, we don't just do moderate to vigorous physical activity. We do plenty of other things with our body. And we can conceptualize this really in 4 parts. And that was the kind of idea we had, which is, well, a third of the day we're going to sleep, so our body doesn't do anything, but the sleeping time has a physiological necessity and some mechanisms that are important for us. Then we have to sit. And that's really a bit the new kid on the block, if you want, because our society has been invaded by sitting, and our lifestyle has been invaded by sitting. Our work, our schooling, our transportation, our leisure time, sitting is becoming more and more prevalent. And in the last 15 years, we started understanding that this sitting in itself is associated with some negative effect on health. It's been seen that people that sit longer are more at a higher risk of premature mortality, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, all sorts of things. And then we exercise at the top end in terms of loads of movement. And there is that gray area in between where we are not exercising and not sitting, which is kind of the light activity we do in everyday life. So going back to the very early, the first physical activity guidelines that were produced in America, in the United States, the evidence came from exercise physiologists where they put people in gyms and they knew that vigorous activity was really important. But they stated, you must do 30 minutes, but keep a background of physical activity quite high. And that background had never been quantified. And that background is being eroded by sitting. So this piece of research we've done was really to try to understand what is the perfect balance between this, or the way we like to call it a cocktail, because essentially we have 24 hours in a day and you have to have the dosage of all the ingredients just about right to not only fit your health, but also fit your circumstances. It's fair to say that we are, our behavior is mostly shaped by our environment and the things we are asked to do. So sitting, we are asked to do it more and more. We've become very efficient at working in a seated position and being very effective at that. So for us, the idea was to say, okay, how many hours of sitting, how much exercise or movement do I need to do in order to counteract the negative effect of sitting? And how much more above that do I have to go to start racking benefits again? So if you want, beforehand, people considered physical activity on one hand, exercise, and they considered sitting on the other. And they said, well, you have to do a lot of this and a little of that, but the interaction with these two things was never really considered. So this piece of study, we were really lucky. We were able to work with great scientists around the world that had beautiful data cohort studies that had been running for many years. And we collaborated so that we could bring all this data from around the world together and be able to try to get the best estimates possible from the most objective data, because we actually measured people movement, the real movement through an accelerometer that tells you how much people move. And we were able to just essentially map out what is this cocktail and how your risk is associated with different combination of sitting and exercising, light activity and sleep. And essentially that's what that piece of research did. And in a way it brought back amazing research from really at the birth of physical activity research that goes back to a visionary called Jerry Morris, who was a physician from Scotland. And he was totally derided by the medical establishment. And he did this fantastic study called the London Bus Study, in which he contrasted the health records of conductors of the bus that sat all day and the guys that sat, that stood at the back of the buses checking tickets. And he noticed that there was an amazing difference in terms of premature death risk and this kind of thing. And our research just essentially goes back and put this on a map, giving you the possibility of balancing these things the right way.
And so in the end of the day, I think we can say, probably with you filling in the gaps, that there is an importance, obviously, of sleep. There's a necessity of sitting, but separate from exercise, which we definitely are not discouraging, but that there's something beyond that in terms of how you break up your sitting time with what I've tended to call NEAT. And I don't use the word thermogenesis because most people in the public would just gloss over. So I call it non-exercise activity time. I've decided to unilaterally change the T to a word that makes sense to people. In a sense, becoming NEAT freaks. not in terms of the neatness of your house, although I would advocate that that's a good idea, but becoming a sort of neat freak. And I love how we're coming up with terms like cocktail and neat freak and things that people can identify with as fun stuff. How would, and maybe we could take this one of two ways. First, how do you take this data on the breaking up of sitting time with light activity throughout the day that may be built into a purpose? Okay, well, I'm going to go to the restroom, but I'm going to go to the one 3 away instead of the first one. I'm going to park further when I'm at the grocery store. It's 2 flights, so I'm going to take the stairs, or I won't make an excuse. It's the 10th floor, but I'll go to the 8th floor and I can take 2 flights. Any way, shape, or form I can build in movement beyond my exercise. How can we practically, obviously if someone's starting with 0 and they're sitting for 11 hours, one of your points was, hey, look, do anything. Your best bang for your buck is just going to do anything. But if you were to say, for instance, and you don't have to stick with this, I'm just throwing it out there, if at all possible, try to break every 20, 30 minutes with some level of physical activity, or alternating sitting, standing desks, or these are 3 different ways. How could you give us something concrete in a practical manner that we could apply to the non-exercise activity time part of the picture?
Okay, so that's a really good question, because that becomes really difficult as a message, because when you're saying 30 minutes of physical activity, that's really understandable. That has a clear target. But now with this research, we noticed that you can do the same, you can have the same benefit in multiple ways. So we had to kind of find a way around that. And we came up with this slight, simple formula that relies on the fact that we have to sit, and really our sitting behavior is quite entrenched in our daily life through our working and things. So we don't have that much choice over it. So if I'm going to sit 10 hours in a day, what I need to do is 3 minutes of exercise, so moderate to vigorous physical activity for every hours of sitting. So it's a 3-2-1. That gives me a simple formula. That means I do 10 hours of sitting, 30 minutes of physical activity, moderate to vigorous, mostly exercise, and the rest has to be that what you call NEAT, and I quite like that actually, non-exercising activity acronym. So that gives you the 3 parts there in a simple formula. But then I can tweak that a little bit. And if I don't want to do just exercise, I can take one away, or one of these blocks of 3 minutes of exercise, and replace it with 12 minutes of light activity. So for me, on a day like today, where I know I'm going to have to sit for at least 10 hours in front of my desk, I could go and do 30 minutes of exercise, or I could do 27 minutes of exercise and take a 12-minute walk to the shop to go and buy my groceries. And you can trade this in many, many different ways. Mm-hmm. So it gives total flexibility, but it also gives the possibility for people that don't like exercising, and I can see why people don't, to actually swap entirely the exercise time with light activity time. And again, most of the evidence we have on physical activity is about walking, simple walking. Mm-hmm. Nothing that requires equipment, or it's about being outside, enjoying the outdoors, enjoying being with a friend, enjoying being with your kids. And by the way, playing with your kids, dancing with your partner, or just goofing around, that's movement. That's non-exercising activity.
Exactly. Yes.
So that fits in as well.
And at work, where, well, I guess maybe we'll eventually get back to going to offices. Let's just pretend that the pandemic never happened, as hard as that may be. But the idea that, you're emailing someone, they're really only 6 doors down. Maybe you can consider going over there and speaking to them. And while we would love all the movement to be fun, there are opportunities at work. I do something called walk and talk. So if I have a call, I don't necessarily have to be on a computer and sitting, or even sometimes I'll do my Zooms on the phone. I'm walking and talking. And I don't even apologize anymore. I just tell people, look, I want to let you know I'm going to be walking and talking here because I don't have any other choice because I have to, stay physically active. My background and family history of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes is way too strong So you have just given us a really good, and I love the numbers, by the way, you gave the ratio. Okay, there's 3 minutes of moderate to vigorous, and that would be equivalent to 12 minutes of light. So if that's what we've got from you, and you're like, I hate to sweat. My mother told me that ladies don't sweat. I tell you, I've heard this in the clinical setting. We just don't do that. Okay, I can't break through that. How can we get activity that doesn't sweat? Oh, now we've got numbers here. You know, you can just lightly walk. Anything is better than nothing. And I think one of the things we have to mention, to emphasize here is anything is better than nothing. Even if you don't. Yes.
That's simple as that.
In your day, and I imagine you're doing a combination of both, though. I mean, if I were to tell the truth, I exercise. I can't live without the moderate to vigorous. It's a mental thing. It's I need it to enhance my mood and improve my focus. Even through the pandemic, where I wasn't going to the gym, I noticed a real deterioration in my mental performance just by just only walking. I'm sure that if I did nothing, it would be even worse. But so I don't discount. Please, if you're walking and you want to get your 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day, and that's what you do, and you break it up throughout the day, God bless you. It's way better. But in the end, would you think that maybe most people might benefit from the cocktail, the blend, that a bit at least of some dedicated moderate to vigorous? It doesn't have to be 5 hours a day. I'm exaggerating, but it could even be, if the more vigorous end of it, you might be able to get it done in 20 minutes, 3 or 4 days a week. But then this idea of this light activity, and start thinking outside the box. Every little bit, if it's a minute here, that adds to 3 minutes there, and that everything adds up. We used to think you had to, if it wasn't 30 minutes, it didn't count. I think what you're telling us now is that no, it's probably, I don't know if we've gotten it down to seconds, but it's probably at least in any minute count. So you can start to add it, accumulate it throughout the day. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. That's an absolute statement. Again, it goes back to every move counts. And then each move has maybe a little different weighting. If you want, the more intense it is, the higher the weighting, and the more time efficient it is for you. So if I'm really, really pressed for time during a day, then I'm probably better off jumping on my exercise bike and really pounding it as hard as I possibly can to just get this. And it's also worth saying that we looked at premature mortality. So that's a pretty broad, outcome. Pretty, if you're looking at getting fitter, well, there's no question. You're going to have to go and exercise. The outcome for concentration, that might be a slightly different cocktail as such, yeah? Mm-hmm. There might be slight changes in variation on that. What we looked at is really premature mortality in that respect.
Yes,
that's where it's at.
And it's a strong bottom line. I mean, let's face it, we'd like to be around.
It's true. But that brings in the idea that it gives me a little bit of freedom in terms of how I can organize my day. But it also gives a really strong incentive to the systems we live in to actually allow us to move more. And that's what I tend to say is that, well, there's so much we can do as individuals to change our behavior. So we need to talk to our employers, we need to talk to our governments, we need to talk to our doctors and say, actually facilitate movement for me a little bit, our town planners. And it's all about really changing the systems, our teachers, so that we can reintroduce movement in every aspect of daily life.
Yes.
As humans, we are in a strange position where we are made to move. We're incredibly great machine at movement, but there is this kind of reptilian reflex in us that is really good at conserving energy. So there's no surprise we've been so good at developing really efficient work and very successful species because we are very energy, we conserve energy really well and make our movement efficient. But that might be counterproductive, especially now that we're looking at our behavior beyond ourselves. So how does our behavior impact our health, but also the health of our planet? And that's where physical activity also brings something really important around active transportations, around a lot more physical activity in our daily work. That might also save our planet in a lot of ways, or at least contribute to it.
Sure. Well, I give one example. If you can walk to the grocery store instead of drive there, you're probably going to pump out a lot less carbon dioxide or carbon emissions. Thank you so much for this. I guess I have one question since we've been talking about physical activity, and maybe this is somewhat selfish, and I'm not talking about bodybuilding at all. I'm just talking about where strength training, and not necessarily strength training in the sense of do a set and sit for 3 minutes, but maybe even more toning. Maybe I don't know if you would call it an aerobic-ish version of strength training, but I, for instance, don't like to sit for 2 minutes between sets. I will do something and then I will walk around the gym and come back and do the other one. I don't really let my heart rate drop too much. But in general, besides me, what are your thoughts, personally, if you wish, or even from a science perspective, on how much strength training may fit somewhere in the physical activity realm?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question, because we call this the forgotten guidelines. Is everybody remembers about the 30 minutes of physical activity, but don't really contemplate what's inside these 30 minutes. And the World Health Organization is pretty clear that we have to do some of that has to be strength work. It also has to be some sort of balance work in that. And the reason for this is that because the strengthening aspect keeps our body functioning in terms of pure mechanical things. And it's really important as we age specifically. We know that if we are strong, we have a good muscle mass, and as a consequence, a good bone mass structure, then we'll age more gracefully and stay able and not having to rely on others to do things for us for much longer. So maintain independence for much longer. So yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter from the point of view of the 30 minutes. If you go to the gym, combine cardiovascular with strength training. So there's always an element of both, but some good targeted resistance training, strength training is a good thing to do.
Seb, Professor Chastin, I cannot thank you enough for taking the opportunity to join us here on NOTeD on News of the Day on behalf of the True Health Initiative. I hope we can stay in touch over time. I am going to be and I encourage everyone to pay very close attention to the data and analysis your team is putting out. Is there a website or any way, shape, or form people can stay best connected? I love your LinkedIn. I think that's probably maybe one place, but is there another place, a website, or any way, shape, or form you can suggest that our listeners can follow you in your team?
You can find me on Twitter, Seb Chastin, or on LinkedIn. I'm present there, otherwise through my university website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. It has been an absolute honor to speak with you, and you have a wonderful day there across the pond in the beautiful area of Scotland.
Okay, good day to you, Tom.
Thank you so much.